Welcome to Classic 4x4, the podcast for and by classic four-wheel drive enthusiasts. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Classic 4x4 Podcast, and you can follow my trials, tribulations, and antics of collecting and restoring classic four-wheel drives at Overland by the Sea. Today's guest is a specialist on the one thing that listeners request the absolute most, which is somebody to talk about FJs. In my email inbox, in my DM inbox, listeners are always saying, hey, can you get a guest on that can talk about FJs? And interestingly enough, the people that are requesting this are not Toyota people. They are enthusiasts in, the American car realm, the European car realm that want to hear more about FJs. So I took those listener requests very seriously. I went out and contacted several FJ builders and not only builders, but enthusiasts and collectors. And believe it or not, only one of those builders and collectors and enthusiasts actually got back to me. And fortunately, it was literally the most preeminent FJ builder, which was Nelson Calle, who is the CEO and founder of FJ Company. Nelson, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Chris. Just excited. And I don't understand how the other guys didn't take the opportunity. I think it's great to be able to share things about the 4x4 community, about Land Cruisers, of course, about restoring, about the good and the bad as a business and as a product. And I think there's a lot we can talk about. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, I'm very fortunate that the one person that actually got back to me was the most premier and preeminent FJ builder out there in the country. So our listeners are very appreciative, and I'm very appreciative to have you on today. So for all of you out there that don't follow the FJ Company on all the social channels, especially Instagram, you got to follow them. Their handle is FJ Company. Also, you got to check out their website. They have probably one of the most dynamic websites I've ever seen. It's fj.co. So it's fj.co. Check them out online. They actually have the ability to build your own custom FJ Company G-Build. So it's super cool. You can not only build it, but also price it. It's very transparent. It's super neat. You got to check it out. But without further ado, we want to get to know Nelson, the guy behind the FJ Company. So tell us about yourself, where the passion for classic four-wheel drives came from, and especially the passion for FJs.
Well, basically, I became passionate about cars, I guess, the day I was born. And there's absolutely no doubt that I was gearhead since I could smell or open my eyes. Don't ask me why. The only reason is my mother was a pretty good driver. My grandmother was an excellent driver, and I used to ride since I was a baby, I guess, on FJ40s, because that's the only car that my grandfather had. He had a 1972 FJ40 in sky blue, hardtop, and he had that car for about 12 years. Once he wanted something a little, he basically changed it because he wanted a 40. He wanted to give that car to his family member. I think it was his aunt or uncle. And so he handed down that car in great shape 12 years after he bought it. He probably drove it for who knows how many thousands or hundreds of thousands of kilometers. Because as you know, these cars are run 500,000, 600,000 kilometers, 300,000 miles or 500,000 miles, no problem. But then he bought a 1981 FJ40, and that was his second FJ40 during his lifetime. And that car we still have. and we can talk about that car later. We've restored it and kept it. We've restored it twice now, and again, we'll talk about it later. But so the passion comes from very early in my lifetime. I always liked cars in general, all of them. I like all sorts of cars. I like stupid cars, ridiculous cars, the cheapest car, the most expensive car. And I think you would understand that when that happens, you appreciate things in different cars that some people just wouldn't believe. But that's what happens when you have such a passion for cars. Why did that turn into classic 4x4s? Well, it didn't turn into classic 4x4s. As I mentioned, it turned into Land Cruisers because I was a heavy user, secondhand user of Land Cruisers. I was simply in the back of Land Cruisers or in the center bench in the front 3/4 bench of an FJ40, probably every weekend of my life since I was, 2 months old till I was 15 years old or who knows when. But I just was driven around in them, and I would go to school. I would go to to go buy a donut with my grandparents, with my mother. That's what we rode on. So they're heavily ingrained in our brains, in our hearts, in our lifestyle. We were always driving to some remote area, farming area in one of them during the weekend. So we went off-roading in them, not because we wanted to go trailing or rock crawling, but because that was the means to transport to a farm. That was the way you would get to such a small town. And that's how the Land Cruiser has been simply just a part of my life, my brother's life, and certainly my life. And those things have always gone in parallel. The Land Cruisers, the Toyotas, plus cars. And as I have gotten older, I've basically I stopped at maybe 1990, where I can say that I don't really like many cars or many products that are newer than 1990, and I think that might be some sort of problem that I have. But I can say that that's what happens. I only like stuff that is 1995, 1997, or older.
It's funny that you say that because I'm the same way. When I started collecting cars, early on, it was always newer, modern, European fast cars. And as I've gotten older, it's like, you know what? I want to go slower, and I like them older and slower. So I have a rule: if it has an OBD in it, the only car I will drive that has an OBD in it is my daily driver. Right. Other than that, the collection, right. Nothing can have an OBD. Right. That's the way. Right. That's the way I look at it. That's a great story. I was very fortunate to interview your brother, Juan, who is the CEO of Classic.com in season 1. He was a great contributor to our year-end 2022 Classic 4x4 and truck market update. And it's funny, he had the exact same story about where his passion came from. And we talked actually about your grandfather's FJ, which everybody out there is listening to us right now and they don't realize, but Nelson's actually sitting for this interview in that 1981 FJ that him and Juan have restored a couple times. So we love that heritage. We love that story. A question that I ask every guest is, what was your first car or truck, or what was your first vehicle that you had?
So that's a great question. The first car that I was able to use sort of daily was my grandmother's Daihatsu Charade. And a Daihatsu Charade is like a Charmant, I think is what they used to be called it in the US. And it's basically a Toyota. The Daihatsu was a Toyota, and it was an inline 4 with a solid rear axle, leaf springs in the back, and it was a small SUV. And of course, it was bright yellow. It was my grandfather's car, and it had all the engineering of a Toyota. Like the feel of the shifter was very much like the feel of the shifter in an FJ40. The pedals, the plastic parts were all very well built. The door handles, everything was very much like I think they even shared a bunch of parts. I think the door handles and like window levers and all those things were FJ40 parts. So of course, when I was able to start using the car daily, first thing I did is I went to local shops, and I was able to lower the car a little bit. I was able to we widened the steel wheels like an inch or an inch and a half, and we installed Goodyear radials, which were much wider and much better handling and all that stuff. And of course, I took one of the silencers off. I don't think that did anything as far as horsepower or torque, but I felt like it was flying. I don't think it was going any faster.
It made it sound bad, though.
It made it sound horrible, absolutely horrible.
But that's what you were going for.
Yeah. But my neighbors hated the guy in the bright yellow truck and loud bright yellow truck. And that's the first car that I had. So it was great for me in the sense that it was rear wheel drive, which was scarce for a cheap car. Most of the cheap cars that a young person could get or drive, they were all front wheel drives. Normally in Colombia, where I grew up. So this was rear wheel drive, and it was much more durable than Mazda's and I don't want to bad talk about any brand or anything, but it's just a reality. Those were Toyotas, and the cars were just very impossible to destroy. Well, again, Mazdas, Renaults, which were very popular down there, and the other cheap cars, they would be run down 2 years of driving. And I think this car was probably a 1984 or something like that. That car is probably still being driven by someone down there. I wouldn't doubt it.
We all had that phase in our life with our first car where, we customized it. We did something, I think a lot of us want to forget about that phase, but we all had that phase. So, I equally had that phase. That's super cool. Everybody always wants to know, probably with every listener that I talk to, they always say, like, I love when you ask people what their first vehicle was, because it's always a great surprise. Obviously you maintain your own personal collection, though you build, what I would call investment quality bespoke FJs, right? You have your own personal collection. I know you're into Porsches also. So what's in your own personal collection these days?
Well, sometimes I have more than I care to tell. And sometimes I have more than I can sleep with. There's days when I wake up and say, I got to sell some cars. And then I walk into the shop and I say, what should I sell? And my problem, I still have the problem. I think it'll fade away. Is I just try to sell stuff and I can't. I love the cars that I have. They're in the collection for a reason. Those are normally cars that I loved when I was, anywhere from 15 to from 10 years old to 20 years old. So they're mostly at that era of 80s, early 90s that we mentioned. So basically I have, between my brother and I, we have about 10 really cool Porsches. And if I have to highlight something, we have a 993 GT2, which is an incredible car.
Wow. That's beautiful.
And that car is all original. It's 36,000 kilometers. And that's one of the cars that I think I should keep as long as I can get my hands on it, because, they made very few, and it's the monster of the air-cooled era. So I think I'd like to keep them. That's a highlight. I have two Lancia Delta Integrales, which were a dream car when you were young, and you would have never been able to to buy one because it was expensive, limited, and very talented, very hard to keep. So I have two of those, and one of them is a Martini 6, which is the limited, which was limited to, I believe, 400 cars. So it's a numbered car. It's 141. So that one is also, if I would have to highlight, it's a very special car. And then I was able to finally build a car for myself. So I have my G43 soft top, and I've had it for the past 6 months. It's the first FJ company build that I'm able to keep for myself. And I can say that I have it in my garage, and I try to use it every weekend or in the week. I take kids to school. I try to keep the top windows on the sides rolled up, and that's how I keep it. And it's the first time that I have one of our own cars. And I absolutely love it, because normally I have to sell them all, or I've had to sell them for cash flow purposes of the company. And this one I kept. And it's a beautiful car. It's beige with honey leather interior. So I love that car.
That's cool. Now, did you build that? Because you have a couple different at FJ Company, which we're going to talk about. But that one you built for yourself, did you build it in the Heritage, the Expedition, or the Signature style? Or was it just completely bespoke? Like you checked every box you ever wanted?
Yeah, so I kept the Heritage look.
Mm-hmm.
I kept the Heritage look on the car. So all the knobs are Heritage. All the buttons in the car are the old school look. The door handles are the older looking ones. But it has all the mechanical components of a Signature. It's got the supercharger and the lockers, and which, by the way, the supercharger, if you have a hardtop and if you have a hardtop and you have the bigger wheels and tires, I would say the supercharger becomes very nice to have. In a Heritage with the soft top, the car is lighter, considerably lighter. So the supercharger becomes even like I wouldn't call it overkill, because it still feels well for the platform of the car, but it's extremely powerful. So for what I do, which is literally drive the kids to school, go have a coffee. I don't off-road the car because I'm not in an area where I would do that. It's just extremely powerful. So what I'm trying to get at is we went a little bit off subject, but let's just do it now. The soft top with the normally aspirated 1GR V6 is extremely powerful. It's super fast. It's very fun to drive. My car has the supercharger, which is now sports car feeling territory, but that's the daily driver that I have. And yes, it's kind of a one-off in the sense that it has Heritage look, but it has all the Signature drivetrain. And it has a couple of colors that belong in the Expedition line. So my wheels are matte, sort of like a gunmetal gray. And I drive it normally without hubcaps. But I tried to switch between hubcaps on and off. And so we can talk about our wheels. I have our wheels on the car, which are the FJ Company cast aluminum wheels that look like an old steel wheel. And they have you can bolt on the clips so that you can use the Toyota original chrome hubcaps front and rear. So what I do is I change the car once in a while. If I want to have the car look more of the Expedition type with the matte black finish, I take the hubcaps off. I take the clips off, and then I have let's say, a rugged look. And when you go the other way, it looks much more nostalgic, sort of that Japanese old school nostalgic, and it really changes the car. So I think that's the benefit of our wheels. You can go back and forth with those two looks, and you can dramatically change the look of an FJ Cruiser, an FJ62, an FJ80. You can play with those when you install them in those cars. And that's
super cool. And I got to tell you, since you brought up the wheels, I do want to mention to our listeners, you guys build and have these built cast aluminum wheels that actually replicate the original Toyota steel wheels, and they will fit on any Toyota 6-lug application. And they also fit the original hubcaps. So, and obviously are much lighter and much more durable because they're cast aluminum versus cast steel. But most importantly, you've been very generous to our listeners, and for all of our listeners out there, you can go on the at fj.co and order these wheels. But for a very limited time, which is 60 days from the airing of this episode, if you use discount code at checkout, Classic 4X4 Podcast, you'll get a 25% discount on those wheels. So thank you for very generously offering that to our Classic 4x4 Podcast listeners. So all of you out there that are looking for a set of retro Toyota wheels, please go to fj.co, use that Classic 4x4 Podcast discount code for 25% off your order, and it'll be live for 60 days from the airing of this, 60 days after the airing of this episode. So thank you, Nelson, for that generous offer. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they look great on Land Cruisers, and I think for hardcore users that want to get playful with the look of their cars, you can switch back and forth again. So they're very cool. You'll like them. Also, it's worth mentioning that they are much lighter than the steel wheel. So, for OCD drivers like probably you are and then I am, you will feel, even in an FJ40, you will feel that the lighter wheel will bring some benefits in the way the steering feels, the way the car brakes, the way the car turns. I mean, it's considerable rotating weight that you're taking off. So while keeping the look, of course.
Yeah, which is super, super cool. So let's talk about, let's switch gears here, no pun intended. And, 8 years ago, you founded the FJ company, right? To build these absolutely beautiful, custom, bespoke FGs, both the 40 and the 43 wheelbases. You build them in 3 different styles. We already mentioned the Heritage style, the Expedition style, and the Signature style. And, what amazes me about your builds, and Paul Potratz from Helderberg put it best. He builds these amazing high quality Land Rover Defenders. And what he calls them, and he's coined this term, is they're investment quality builds. And in my opinion, you're the only one out there building investment quality FJs. These things have new 1GR 4-liter V6 Toyota engines, Toyota 5-speed manual transmissions, custom stainless exhaust. You do a conversion on the front suspension with a coil suspension conversion up front. They have ABS, they have stability and traction control, automatic locking hubs, air conditioning, a digital cluster, LED lighting. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, you build these things at a level that is absolutely second to none. And to use Paul Potratz from Helderberg's coined term, they are investment quality FJs. Whether you're getting the Heritage model, the Expedition model, or the Signature model, there's a different flavor for everybody. They're built to a level that is absolutely second to none. So how did you end up founding the FJ company and building these, amazing FJs, from ground up? They're all nut and bolt builds.
Well, it's becoming a long story now, because now we've been doing this for 8 years, and it was sort of accidental. Accidental because, as I mentioned before, and we spoke about before, The first car that we restored for fun was my grandfather's second Land Cruiser. So it's a medium blue FJ40, which coincidentally we're doing some work in the shop, and I didn't have a silent place outside in the shop to sit. I came inside the car that was closer to the Wi-Fi, and it happens to be FJ Company 001. So this is, and it is, I'll send you pictures of the plaque. This has 001 FJ Company built in several places. It was the first car that we restored for fun. And for fun, I mean, at the time I was living in Colombia, 2008, 2009, I believe. And my brother was still in Florida. He was in Florida, and one day I was driving. I was going to the dentist. I won't forget this. I was going to the dentist, and I came out of the dentist, and I go out. My dentist is a family member, so I go out of her place, and I see this beautiful FJ40 driving into her place, into the parking lot at her building. And I was like, oh my God, what is that? And it was my cousin driving my grandfather's FJ40, a bit souped up. So it had a lift to it. Of course, it had, I want to say 33s or even 35s. Tires, and it had like a bikini top, and I was like, oh my God. But I didn't know it was my grandfather. So I walk up to Jaime, my cousin, and he says, this is it. This is Nelson. My grandfather was Nelson as well. This is Nelson's. And I'm like, you're kidding me. And I no, this is Nelson's FJ40. And I'm like, who did this? And he's like, well, we did it here and there and there. So it was resprayed, repainted, and souped up. So I sent my brother a picture. Immediately, I text him a picture, and he's like, "Oh my God, I want you to send that car to me now. That's the car that I want to drive the kids in for the weekend. Just do whatever you have to do." And I had no idea how to do that. I had no idea how to export a car. I had no idea. So we started working on how to finish the restoration. It was half finished, and then how to export it and what paperwork you had to get and what were the duties in the U.S. Everything from scratch. That was again 2009, 2010, I believe. And that was the first car that we imported into the U.S. for personal use, for my brother's personal use. And he received the car, and he literally did what he wanted to do, which was drive the car during the weekends. He ended up driving it daily. He's a pretty hardcore, even at the time, that was pretty hardcore, and that's what he did. And the at that time there were, you couldn't even count. There were no Land Cruisers out there on the road. FJ40s, very few. You would have to go to specialized meets, which we didn't even go to at the time. But on the street, you wouldn't see these cars. And it was a huge sensation. The car was, everyone stopped him. Everyone wanted to know about the car. Then he took it to Colorado, where he has another home. And that was even more of a hit. So he kept on telling me, hey, this thing, everyone wants one. Can my friend wants one. Can we build one for him? He's begging me for us to build one for him. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess we can. So at that point, what I said is, let's build one for his friend. And we built one for his friend, and that he loves it. He still has it. But parallel to that, I said, you know what? I'm going to build one and sell it. There. And that was John Deere Green FJ40 soft up. And then we built it. Very nice build. By by those days, we thought they were nice builds. But if I look at those builds today, I can tell you that everything is 80% better in every way. Paint, prep, mechanically, everything has been perfected. We're over 200 built cars and delivered cars to this day. So of course we've learned a bunch of things. But that John Deere Green, then we said, all right, I had some experience with other classic cars. I used to go to classic car auction shows. So I knew a little bit about the market, and I said, you know what? We have to sell this car, this type of restoration. I haven't seen this type of restoration in a 4x4. Let's do it over the top. Let's do it like people do a Light 11 or like people do a Ferrari. Let's do a very well done restoration on this FJ40. So that's the way we did that John Deere Green. And my intention was to take it to Mecum or to take it to Gooding or one house. But at the time, I had a good relationship with RK Motors in Charlotte, and they had a one and only auction in Charlotte that was 2014, I think. They were trying to enter the auction market, and they did that one and only auction, and it was a very well laid out auction. Beautiful setting in the convention center, I think, in Charlotte. And they advertised the auction everywhere because they were entering the market. And they had a bunch of very high level muscle cars, a bunch of high level vintage cars, all sorts of vehicles that were incredibly high quality. And then there was that Stoll FJ40 in John Deere Green. Mm-hmm. And that car just absolutely made a splash because, again, it's hard to go backwards now where there's Land Cruisers for sale every hour. At that time, that was a unicorn. That car was a unicorn. I hadn't seen a handful of cars being sold in auctions that were Land Cruisers. And again, the color and the fact that it was between Corvettes and Mustangs and Porsches and Ferraris. And so that car, I want to say it was 2014, that car sold for $65,000, which was like unheard of. FJ40 for that price was like, who was drunk? Like nobody understood.
Now we don't be tripping over ourselves to buy that caliber restoration for $65,000, right?
And that car, believe it or not, as far as I remember, even up to a year ago, I haven't spoken to them again. But that car is at a Toyota dealership in Naples, at least up to a year ago from today, and the guy loves it. He was a Toyota dealer. He put it in his dealer showroom. I guess he drives it a couple miles, but that's number two. So the first one was personal use. Number two was for commercial hobby purposes. And of course, like anything like that, it sounds like, oh, well, that worked out. Because at that time, even, we were just a couple guys using trusted shops. So I think we were able to break even or make a little bit of money in the car, which was, as you know, unheard of. You don't restore a car, take it to an auction and make money. That's not a money winning. It's
not a great business model. It's more driven by passion than profit. I mean, especially the hours that go. I mean, today, you talk about that one that you sold back, 8+ years ago. And I love the fact that every great business comes from passion. I love that you started building them for yourselves. And then people were like, hey, I like that. I want one. And then one led to 2 to 3 to like over 200 now, 8 years later. But, one of the things that, I think people underestimate is what goes into these builds. I mean, these builds, are I think you, in our pre-interview, you told me, when you calculated, put pen to paper and your team really, reduces it down to every minute and every hour. these FJ company builds are 4,000 plus hours goes into them. So yes, you have a product that costs, in the mid 200,000s, but when you think about what you put into them, right? You put in new, they are nut and bolt, ground up, frame off. Everything is new, rebuilt, or reconditioned, right? So you talk about just the parts, right? And the base vehicle, but then you add 4,000 hours on top of that. When you bring that, that mid $200,000 build cost, what it costs a buyer to buy one of these, and you really reduce it down to an hourly basis and the cost of parts, there isn't a lot left on the bone. This is pure passion versus is profit. Yes, everybody deserves to make a couple shekels, but yes, it's a mid $200,000, mid $200,000, FJ that in reality, the value that is presented based on what goes into these to build these is absolutely immense.
Yeah. That's a great point, Chris. And the way we have molded the business over the years is we definitely veered towards doing what people have asked us the most, which is I want to have a hassle-free as possible classic Land Cruiser. And for that, we have slowly veered into I don't like the term, but that's the term. It's we do resto mods of a Land Cruiser, staying with Toyota, staying within the Toyota platform, at least for now. And we have focused on the highly customized builds because we feel that that's the way to find like-minded clients. This is not a product that is for everyone. I get a lot of calls of people that are saying, well, I want to buy a Mercedes G-Wagon or a Range Rover, but I'm looking at your cars also. And I immediately explain to them that we are probably not what they're looking for. And I'm very careful, and we're lucky now that we can choose our 8 or 9 clients that we do per year. And I think that's a huge plus because at the beginning we couldn't choose our clients. I mean, at the early beginning, we were lucky that nobody was building them. So we would put them on auctions and they would sell for great prices. And throughout time, we became a by referral company. The website has also been instrumental in the fact that we can support those referrals and show people previous builds. So it's been a great marketing tool. But nowadays, I can say that I'm most of the times I'm lucky that we can choose who we sell to. And we're really careful as to who we mate with one of our products, because if they're expecting a Range Rover because of the price point, they're going to be disappointed. These are cars that are not silent like a modern car. These are cars that are not watertight like a modern car. And many of those things, they're not aerodynamic because it's the 1960s body on top of 2022 drivetrain. Yes, but it's a 1960s body, true to the car. So I think that's the first thing. And as far as the price, I would have to I'll try to go and summarize how we build them, because that'll show you where we get the 4,000 hours or even more. And I'll explain how we measure our times and all that. Basically, when we get an order, we find a suitable donor. So it has to be an FJ40 or FJ43. And with an FJ40, we obviously build what we call a G40. And with an FJ43, we build a G43. The G stands for 1GR. So the engine, the platform that we're using is the 1GR platform, which is the engine that very similar to the engine in a 4Runner and a US 4Runner or US Tacoma. US now has a 2GR, which is a 3.5 liter. We have the previous engine, which is a 1GR. It's a 4 liter V6, 24 valves. that engine is still the engine that comes in the 2023 GRJ 70 line. That is the Land Cruiser, or the if you want to give it a nickname, it's the FJ70, which is the modern FJ40. You're probably familiar with them, but there's a lot of people that are not, because those cars have never been imported into the US, other than by the 25-year-old rule. So basically, the Land Cruiser 70 series is the modern FJ40 series that is sold all over the world except in the US. Don't ask me why, because there's a huge pent-up demand for that car. And you and I know it. People would love to be able to get their hands on a brand new 2023. Yeah. So we use everything from that car. So when somebody makes an order, we find a suitable donor. By suitable, I mean, you're going to laugh at this. I mean, a chassis. Why? Why? Because I don't believe that there are any inexpensive, no rust Land FJ40 or 43s out there. There's just, they don't exist. It's old metal. They used to rust, and they are all rusted by now. There's very few exceptions of trailer queens or collections or dealer cars. Yes, of course, but that happens in every car. So what we end up using is basically the chassis and the firewall area of the body. So again, I'll go in detail. The first thing we do is we get the donor vehicle. With the deposit, with the 50% deposit, we go out and source the parts from Japan or from the Middle East. So we source new 1GR engines. We source everything that comes in a Land Cruiser 70 2023, which is front differential with brakes, with hubs, the whole differential assembled, rear differential, the entire front suspension assembly, which is the coils, trailing arms, etc., sway bars. Everything is sourced new. 5-speed transmission, the brand new one from Toyota, which is amazingly good. And the wiring harness, complete wiring harness, comes out of an FJ70 line with the electronic cluster that comes in a 70, which we later on resto mod and modify so that it looks old, but it's a brand new cluster from a 70 series. So all those parts are ordered in advance. In the meantime, we disassemble the 40, the donor vehicle. We get rid of, as I said, probably 70% of the metal. Wow. Or more. At the same time, the chassis is taken to a jig where it's straightened out if it needs to be straightened out. It's modernized, reinforced. It's spot welded throughout the entire chassis, because remember, we're installing a 235 horsepower engine at the wheel in a 110 horsepower chassis that was built or designed in the 1960s or 50s, maybe. And so it's reinforced. There's several welded reinforcements that are added throughout the chassis. But more importantly, we 3D designed our own braces for the LC70 front suspension design. So everything that a Land Cruiser 70 has in front to accommodate the coils, the front differential, everything we designed so that we could weld into the original FJ40 chassis. So the chassis is prepared on top of the jig, and after that's all welded, after it's been built and straightened and reinforced, we send it out. This is one of the only few things that we do outside of our shop. This is all, by the way, this is all done within our facility and with our people. These guys have been with us most of our guys have been with us for more than 5 years. So they're very well trained. They know what they're doing. We've all made our mistakes together, and we've all tried to correct most of our mistakes together. So these guys do most of the work. And this chassis sent out to a facility which is luckily nearby, where it's dipped into a zinc pool at 400 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
That way we're able to zinc protect the whole chassis, and that helps take rust and stop rust from the inner crevices of the chassis, which are impossible to reach by hand. It's dipped in the pool and it's galvanized, basically zinc galvanized. That's the way the chassis comes out, and then it goes back into the production line. At the same time, the body is being worked on in parallel. At the same time, sorry. So throughout the years, we even changed so that we import our own metal. We are importing rolls of galvanized steel rolls. And that's what we're building out our body panel from. We used to use the same steel that normally people use, but unfortunately that steel sometimes creates a lot of future problems of rusting, bubbling, and it can become problematic in a short period of time, especially if you're in areas like where you live or where I live, where there's salty wind. It's difficult. So
let me get this right. You're actually pressing your own replacement panels?
No. So we import our steel, galvanized steel, which is modern steel. It's the grade of steel that would be used in a modern build from Volkswagen. Unless it's aluminum, this is what a manufacturer would use. We provide the raw material to the pressers down in Colombia. So basically, there's 4 or 5 good artisanal Toyota Land Cruiser body part pressers down there, and we provide them with the raw material. They press the rear top, the right front fender, not the hoods. The hoods we do ourselves, but the right front fender, left front fender, left, right rears, the entire top. So they press these parts and then we bring them back into our shop, and we basically have to build them again. Why? Because they are manually pressed, and most of the parts that you can buy in the market that are done in Central America or Colombia are great parts, but none of them will be equal to the other. There's inches of differences because these are old very manual presses. We're using the same people that most of the builders use in the end, because those are the people that are making replacement parts for Land Cruisers, but we use our own metal. And again, once they get into our shop, we have jigs for every single quarter where we will correct that piece and make it as uniform as possible.
Wow. Mm-hmm. That's impressive.
Yeah.
Right there alone. I mean, now I'm kind of starting to track hours, and I'm trying to figure out how you're even at 4,000 hours, right? Because in my head, I'm like, as you're going through this process, I'm like, okay, that's a couple hundred. That's a few more hundred. We're at 1,000. Okay, that's a few more hundred, and we haven't even installed the powertrain yet at this point.
and you're absolutely right. And by the way, the term investment build, I don't want to toot our own horns, but we think it's true. And we've tried to design things hopefully to stick to that. And in the sense that every single build that we've made has a number, as an FJ code number in several parts of the car. But more importantly, so every car is documented. So if you go to our site and you go to featured builds, those are the cars that we have built. And unless the owner has asked us to keep his build private, which is there's a handful of those, there's 10% of the people just don't want their cars online. Whatever has come out of our factory is documented on our site, and you can go and look at each stage of the build. So there's pictures of the donor vehicle, and there's pictures of the stages and steps that you and I are talking about. And so when you buy one of our cars, you have a numbered car. Nowadays, we have built 30 G series, and we are building about 7 or 8 per year. So you would have one of 7 of a year of a vintage, one of 8. So I think keeping things limited is key to your investment. That limit is on purpose, but also that limit is a reality. And it's very hard it's extremely hard to build more than 3 cars per year. We have a good group of people, seasoned people that makes us able to do 7 or 8 of these cars.
So you've taken these frames, right? You have these chassis, the donor chassis. You basically strip the thing down to the firewall and the frame. You, I'd say, I don't want to say rebuild, but you really recondition and refurbish the frame from top to bottom in a jig. You then, obviously accommodate the modern front coil spring suspension. You build it out there. You have already sourced these brand new powertrain parts, right? It's, the engine, the transmission, the wiring harnesses. And then while this is all happening, you're literally rebuilding brand new bodies, right? From modernized metals that are recently pressed. So you put all that body back together. You have this frame. Now it's time to put the new powertrain in, and it all kind of comes together. So my question is, once you put all that back together, right? Once you put all that back together, at what point do you really get to build it to what the customer sees? Right, the picture or the colors that they've chosen, the fabrics or the interior that they've chosen, and the style, whether it's the heritage build, the expedition build, and the signature build.
That's a great point, because the as I mentioned, the entire build is documented, but the initial 6 months for somebody that is not used to restoring cars like you are. The initial stages of the build are kind of scary. Everyone is like, "Oh my God, but you just destroyed the car. How is this possible?"
But it's also the most important part of the build too.
Yes.
And that's what people don't realize. What you can't see is the absolute most important part, right, and where the value is.
And this is why we've been religious about documenting each and every one of our builds. And again, you can go to fj.co, go to featured builds, and you will see the history of each car. So by the 6th month, to answer your question, by the 6th month, we have finished chassis, unpainted. Just there's obviously a protection layer there, but it's not paint. And there's a pre-assembled body on top, mounted on the chassis, with prepped and pre-assembled body. Why do we do this? Because everything is pre-assembled before going to paint. That way we make sure that we have perfect gaps, make sure that the body sits right on the body mounts. So the car really looks like a built car, but it's going to be disassembled again. So in the 6th month, we ask for 25% deposit. That's when we're ready to do a full prep on the body and paint. And again, it is disassembled again because some of the parts are painted. Everything is painted at the same time, but they're not painted as a body. They're painted separately, and obviously they're painted separate from the chassis. So it comes off the chassis again. So temporarily the car is pre-assembled, then it's disassembled at that point, which is the 6 month. You get pictures where your car looks like a car. And then the next set of pictures in the month 7 or 8, you get again a disassembled car, but in beautiful colors. So you'll see your tub in the color that you wanted. You'll see the fenders, you'll see the doors, you'll see all the body parts in the beautiful color that you chose. And you will see the rolling chassis all black and beautiful with the engine on top, with the suspension already hanging there. It's a rolling chassis. Everything mechanical is there. And so by the 8th or 9th month, we have the car in the assembly line, and those pictures are unbelievable. That's when there's a perfect looking rolling chassis with part of the body on top, and then there's the interior is the initial stages of building the interior. The wiring harness is being put in, the cluster. So that's when all our clients are breathing and get all anxious and they want to drive it now. There's still 3 months to go. So that's yeah. So it's taking us 12, and I want to say a little bit under 12 months to do an entire G build nowadays. It started at 14, 15 months, and I think we're at 11. And I think that's as short as we'll make it. We're working on a project where we build at least a 43 in advance to a point where the chassis is ready, the rolling chassis is ready, and the body is ready, primed, so that people can still choose the color, and so that delivery will be shortened to maybe 4 months, but it's still a project, and we'll see how that goes. We've tried that before and we haven't been able to. We'll try that this time again.
That's interesting. So from that first conversation till delivering it to the customer, it's 12 months. But really the fact of the matter is, the first 9 months are the most important, where you're literally building this thing from ground up, and the finished product is essentially a higher quality build than what Toyota originally built back in the 70s and 80s when this thing rolled off the Toyota line, which is absolutely amazing. I know you still say 4,000 hours to build these things, but as I go through my head in this 12-month span, man, and I'm actually amazed how you even do it in 4,000 hours. That is absolutely impressive. I know you have a lot of very, very happy customers. And obviously we always talk about, with any builder that I have on the podcast, whether it's Paul Potratz from Helderberg, who builds these investment quality Defenders, or Charlie Pitcher from New Era. A lot of people know him as Metal by Charlie, who builds these amazing custom Dodges. There is a big difference between perception and reality. The perception is, $250,000 is a lot of money, but $100,000 is a lot less money. But the reality of the value is that a $250,000 build presents a much better value than a shoddily done $100,000 mediocre restoration. So a $250,000 build can actually present more value to a customer than $100,000 build. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't understand, but obviously your clients do understand. And especially now our listeners understand and what goes into these builds and how complicated they are. So as we kind of get into the end here, I want to talk about the FJ market. I actually had this conversation with your brother in the end of episode, or the end of season 1, in our last episode of that season, where we did our classic 4x4 market update. And, the overall classic car market and truck market is starting to see a readjustment. That said, though, classic trucks and 4x4s are doing really well in that market, especially the $100,000 plus, builds and value vehicles. So what are you seeing out there in the FJ market? I mean, we are seeing a little bit of readjustment. It's not so much in the $100,000 plus world, more so in the $100,000 or $50,000 and less world, where we're seeing a more major readjustment. What is your take on where the FJ market has gone and where it's going?
So yeah, I think you're right on the money. Like on our level, which is again mid 200s, there's amazing build for Broncos, for Scouts, for Land Rovers, for other 4x4s, and in each category, I think there must be like 2 leading builders that I feel like those guys are not feeling any sort of problem right now. We're lucky so far that we are not feeling any sort of pullback as far as our ability to sell 7 or 8 builds per year. So far, we've been protected. I would say that it's still a very healthy market for us. I get a lot of phone calls. I still get to do what I told you, sort of choose our clients. Is that going to last forever? I don't think so, but so far, cross fingers, we're doing well in that sense. What we have seen though is in the low price range of anywhere between 20 to 60, or 60 is not low, but anywhere between 20 to 40,000. There's been several factors. First, there's a flood of inventory. I think the number of imported cars from South America, from different sources, even from Arab countries now, I think the number must have tripled or quadrupled. I'm just guessing there, but you just see it, and we will have to look at the data once let's say the January auctions go by. It's going to be interesting to try and measure how many Land Cruiser based products go through the block. And I think it's going to be an eye popping number for sure, because I mean, we see them daily, and I'm sure you follow the markets, and they are out there. Mecum had, I don't know how many cars, but many cars. And unfortunately, I can't say that the quality has been maintained. I think it's more cars of lesser quality. These are cars that are flash prepared for sale in auction, as is sale. There's no responsibility. So it's for anybody that has a little bit of experience, they'll be able to agree that there's these are beautified in a hurry, and there's tons of Bondo. There's tons of rust beneath that Bondo. So unfortunately, there's not a great product out there. So a lot of the first-time buyers are now second-time buyers, and they're more educated, and they're understanding that they can't buy cheap things like you mentioned before. Mm-hmm. It's very expensive to buy those things because the paint will blow up quicker than anyone knows, and they'll end up either having to fire sell the car or doing just redoing the car altogether, which is, as you know, extremely expensive. So I think in the low end of the market, there is an average price reduction for sure. I think we've probably been hit with 25% or some number like that. I'm just guessing, but I think it could be around there. And there's also pent-up demand to sell. So what do I mean by that? And you probably spoke to my brother Juan about the data in classic.com, which shows us that the sell-through rates a year ago, so 12 months ago, 24 months ago, sell-through rates were at almost 90%. And that's for the general market, but certainly so for FJ40 line, if we want to focus on something. and most, certainly Broncos, which were on the up, Land Rovers, which were increasing dramatically those days. The sell-through rate was 90%. Of 100 cars that went to the block, 90 found a buyer. And the prices were extremely healthy. The sell-through rates nowadays are probably at the 50% mark. We're going to have to see the numbers from Mecum. I wouldn't be surprised if they are lower than 50%. So what does that mean? That means, and maybe we're repeating something that doesn't need to be repeated, but it's worth the time. That means that 50% of the people that wanted to sell or had the need to sell, some of those are desperate to sell, have not sold. And those cars will revisit the market at lower points because, as I mentioned, and as you know, sometimes people really do have to sell. They really do have to let go of the car. And those gaps are not 5% gaps. Those gaps tend to be bigger gaps. So I feel like the low-end market is flooded with cars. The quality of the low-end market is diminished or has decreased. And I feel like there's still more room for that market to come down, which honestly it should, because these are not well-prepared cars. These are cars that most likely will be a problem for the buyer, and the buyer will have to spend a lot of money on the car to get it sorted out and presentable.
You make an amazing point that lower quality imported $50,000 FJ that goes across the block within 2 years ends up turning into a $250,000 FJ, because what you have to put into it to get it to caliber, or worst case scenario, you have to let it go anyway. You know, you're going to run it across the block anyway, let it go. And the market has settled out, has seen the inherent lower value of these mass amount of imported low quality FGs, and you're going to take a loss on it anyway. It's super interesting for you to talk about this dynamic, supply and demand, right? In any market, there's supply and demand. Even if demand stays stable, once you add a mass amount of supply into it, obviously prices are going to come back, which is what we're seeing right now. But the parallels, the similarities that you're seeing in the FJ market, where you have the importers just flooding the U.S. markets with these lower quality builds, is very similar and parallel to what we're seeing in the Defender market right now. The Defender market had a great year last year, and they're pulling back real heavy for that exact same reason. You have tons of importers just bringing in, these low quality builds. And again, even if demand stays stable, more supply into that market is going to bring prices down. And what's even more amazing is how it's really isolated to the lower end of the market, not the higher end of the market, but also the buyer in the higher end of the market sees the value. Number one, they understand inherent value versus, realistic value versus perceived value. And they're a little bit more economically insulated too. But it's interesting that you bring up a point that you actually see this, we've seen it, roughly around a 25% pull back in the lower end of the market, and you actually see a little bit more, which, hey, for a lot of people, that creates opportunities, especially, builders like yourself, where you could buy the donor vehicles at a little bit better number and build a higher quality one. That's interesting. I appreciate that perspective on the market. But do you see a leveling out at some point here in the future?
Well, I forgot to mention one more thing, Chris, is remember the exchange rates have been a huge factor, even for the Land Rovers, because the pound went down considerably. I don't know the number, but certainly Colombian pesos and Latin American currencies, they're all down, I want to say 25, 30%. So right there, the cost for labor and some of the, not parts only, because parts and all those things are dollar based, but the labor, it theoretically cost went 30% down. So a lot of the smaller shops and builders hurry to build cars, motivated by those numbers. So that helps for the flood, the sheer number of builds out there. And as for your question, is this going to level out? Sure, I think it'll definitely level out in the sense that as soon as the inventory that is spent, those pent up sales go through, there should be the demand for a better build. I think people are getting more educated. I feel like the first time buyer is a different person from the second time buyer, and you probably have friends. You're I would call you a professional because you've done this too many times to not be a professional. But of course you have friends that are still fighting with their wives or their better halves because of the oil stain and the brake fluid stain in the garage. So the pandemic brought great volume and liquidity to our market, but there's also still out there first time buyers that are still scratching their heads as to why the hell did I buy that thing and it's in my garage and it's running my garage. So I think the market needs to digest all those things. That some of the first time buyers will maybe not come back, but I feel like a lot of them are going to stay, and a lot of them are passionate enough where they're going to keep on buying and selling cars. Some of them will go even further and collect a little bit of cars. So I think that it's not only the digestion of the FJ40 market that needs to come, but there's also, I think, the digestion of 3 years of a seismic shift with the online and bring a trailer world that didn't exist 4 years ago. They were there, but they were not massively used. And now, as you know, you and I can buy every day. Saturday, Sunday, you want to sell a car? Okay, let's go sell a car. You want to buy a car on a holiday? Let's go buy a car on a holiday. That's new. And that's great. And I think we're adjusting to that. But that also gives me, that's a segue to say that since we are in a liquid market now, I do believe that these prices will stabilize. And I feel like there's always going to be a much healthier market than it was before. For toys like these, for hobbyists like you and I, for first time buyers, or for that person that just simply wants that single Land Cruiser or Land Rover or Scout because his grandfather had it or whatever. I think it's much healthier nowadays than 2 years ago, for sure.
That's great. That's great to hear. Yeah. Well, Nelson, I can't thank you enough for joining us on the Classic 4x4 podcast. To all of our listeners out there, if you don't follow the FJ Company on Instagram and the other social channels, make sure you do. Their handle is FJ Company. Got to check out their website. They have a dynamic build feature at fj.co. It's fj.co. You can actually build one of their Heritage, Expedition, or Signature G models right on their website. Price them. It's super cool. And most importantly, for all of you out there, you Toyota enthusiasts, collectors, builders, if you are interested in the cast aluminum replicate wheels, Toyota replicate steel wheels that are built in cast aluminum, that are an immensely lighter product that are built by or sourced by FJ Company, head to their website, fj.co, check them out. They can be used on any six-lug Toyota application. They fit the original Toyota hubcaps. And from when this episode airs till 60 days thereafter, for our Classic 4x4 podcast listeners, you get a 25% discount. Just make sure you put in discount code Classic 4x4 podcast to get that 25% discount. Again, Nelson, I can't thank you enough for your time, your participation, and all the information that you have bestowed on us today. Really greatly appreciate it.
Chris, thank you very, very much. It was a lot of fun. It's great talking to you. I hope we do this in person one day and keep on talking about cars and collections and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be the last time. I'm pretty convinced about it. So I hope to see you soon. And again, thank you for having this space for us. We'd love to be here, and we'd love to just chat with people that are in the industry and like-minded. Thank you very much.
I definitely look forward to crossing paths. Thanks a lot and have a great day.
All right.
I hope you enjoyed Nelson Calle from the FJ Company. Don't forget to check him out online and follow him on Instagram. Also, stay tuned for our next episode with Robbie Purser from United by Trucks. His patina Chevy square body builds and collection are absolutely insane.